Hi, and welcome back to video 3 of our AI and Ethics series. Now, we've talked about your personal footprint, we've talked about the structural footprint, and I think for many of you, there's probably this thought that somewhere down the line, there is a decision to be made. Do I use these AI tools or do I not? And this is the part where I'm going to push back on somewhat, because for most of us, that decision had already been made, whether we realized it or not. In 2025, a Gallup poll showed that 64% of Americans didn't think they used AI in their day to day. Over half of them didn't think it was on their phone. However, when they were shown a list of everyday AI tasks, 84% of them said, yeah, I use these on a daily basis. So perhaps the question isn't whether we use AI or not, it's what AI do we use, for what purpose are we intentional about it? Let's walk through maybe a typical day. Now, say it's our typical Tuesday. We're going to go out on site, do some monitoring, whatever that might be, and we check the weather before we head out to make sure we're dressed appropriately and have the necessary equipment. Well, weather forecasting is more and more run on analytical AI models. And that matters actually even more so, but we'll get back to that in a little while. Then we hop in the vehicle, map it out. Well, Google Maps has more than 2 billion people using it every month, and its arrival times are about 97% accurate because AI built it in DeepMind. Waze, the same company, reroutes around traffic wreck in real time to save us time and save us fuel. And then we have to fire off a text to the team, and autocorrect takes care of some mistakes before we even realize it. That predictive text that runs on your phone runs on the same family of architecture and transformers that runs ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. It is the same lineage of technology. You search something, and more than half the time now, Google hands you an AI written summary at the top before you even clicked on a single link. Now, all that wasn't to say, gotcha, you're already using the tools, so ignore the cost. We spent 2 videos talking about those costs, and those costs are real. What I'm saying is simpler. It was never a binary choice, on or off, use them, don't use them. It's which tools, for which tasks, and with how much intentionality. And that's a choice you can actually get good at. Now, before we get into intentional use as a skill, let's circle back really quickly to that weather. The European Weather Center, ECMWF, switched on the first fully AI-based forecasting system in operational service at a major forecasting center. Not experimental, operational, since February of 2025. It is in service for 35 member and partner states. And here's the part that matters to what we're talking about. This system uses 1/1000th of the amount of energy that it used before for weather forecasting. 1/1000th. And it's 5 to 15% more accurate in its medium-term forecasting. And it's not just Europe. NOAA put in a whole suite of weather forecasting operations here in the United States. One of their 16-day forecasts run on about 1/3 of 1% of the computing that the old system needed. And it finishes in about 40 minutes. And let's take a look at a few more tools that you might be using on a regular basis specific to the ecological work. Cornell's eBird passed 2 billion bird sightings last August, over 1 million birders feeding it. The trends model behind it uses machine learning to map where almost 3,000 species are and how their populations are moving. Merlin, the bird ID app from the same lab, 10 million downloads, sound ID for more than 2,000 species. iNaturalist crossed 300 million observations, and the computer vision model behind it recognizes over 100,000 species. BirdNet can pick up more than 6,500 species from sound alone. Now let's zoom out to the landscape scale. Global Forest Watch uses deep learning to tag what is driving each new deforestation alert, mining, agriculture, roads, and it does this within a month of detection. Wildlife Insights has run more than 200 million camera trap images through AI for conservation teams. And our own agencies here in the United States, USGS and EPA, have both published formal AI strategies and are using it for everything from wetland methane to condor tracking. So science already runs it, the agencies already run it. What about the rest of the work? Grant reports, communications and outreach, data entry and spreadsheets. What's actually happening here? Because it's easy to look at the ECMWF or the USGS and say, well, that's them. Big agency, data science teams, larger budgets. That's not me at my desk on a Tuesday. Well, the surveys and data say otherwise. In 2025, there was a survey done on over 1,000 nonprofits. 82% are already using AI in some capacity. 82%, but only 10% have any kind of policy governing how they use it. And more than three-quarters have zero AI strategy at all. And in our corner specifically, about half of environmental agencies were already using AI in some regard for impact analysis. So there's a very good chance AI is already in your tool chain, whether there was a meeting called about it or not. Which brings me to an analogy on this friction that you might be feeling about using a tool that you know has some negative consequences and using it anyway, because this is something that has existed in our space the entire time. Now, I want to be careful here. This is not a pivot. The first two videos I talked about the impact of the water use, the impact of the energy, the impact on communities that often didn't get any say in whether the data center was sited there or not. Those are real. And I am not trying to discourage you from being mindful of that. I'm not saying these tools are already being used, so don't worry about that. Those concerns are real and they need to be discussed. But here's what I come back to. We all know that fossil fuel is a problem. Yet we commute to our jobs. We commute to the sites. We run heat in our office. We run AC in our office. We may run heavy equipment on restoration or agroforestry projects. We know many of the mining practices that produce the components for our computers, for our phones, for the batteries that we rely on for alternative energy have negative impacts too. Yet we can't steer clear of using them if we're operating in our modern day society. Paralysis was never really the ethical option. We do the best we can with what we have in the situation we're at while pushing hard to make the system better. So just like with fossil fuels, we don't sit at home in the dark. We do the work we need to do while we try to make the system better. We operate in an imperfect system. And that's not hypocrisy. That's what responsibility looks like, what intentional judgment looks like when you don't get to opt out of the world. And AI is the same shape of problem. The binary was never dirty AI versus clean AI. It was conscious intentional use versus just drifting along on autopilot. And this conscious intentional use genuinely changes the math in a way that sitting it out never could. Now, that may sound like a nice sentiment, but it's real. We showed it at a higher level with the weather forecasting model, but let's take a look at what that looks like in our everyday work. Back to that weather model for an example. We can use tools and services that have already been shown to reduce the negative environmental impact of some of the operations we have. Another good example is if you decide to start adopting some automation to free up your time in your own work or your organization. You could have a simple deterministic tool based on rules that sends out an email every week at a certain time that's if this, then that, versus a million parameter model that drafts a script to do that same very thing. Same objective goal at the end, very different tools, very different footprints on each. And the final example I'll use is an easy one that might come up in many of our organizations or individual work, and that is in our outreach. So say you're doing some kind of social media campaign or some kind of slide deck presentation and you need an image or video. You could go find one that's stock, or you could go and prompt one and then reprompt and then reprompt, and you could burn through a lot of footprint just in prompting things that a little bit of forethought, a little bit of intention, and a little bit of planning could have prevented most of it. Now, I'm not saying don't generate. I'm saying if you are going to go that route because you can't find it with what's already out there, start there. But if you have to pivot to this, then be thoughtful about it, that intentional use. So the waste wasn't using the tool, the waste was not planning and thinking about it beforehand. And every one of those has the same underlying theme. When you're looking at your workflows, stop, look at the task and say, what is the best tool for this? So I found for me, as it probably is for many of you, that was a false binary whether to use AI or not. We're already in it. The good question are the ones left standing. And that is, which AI, for which task, with how much judgment, and under what conditions? And that is exactly the framework we're going to talk about in the next video. So here's where we've landed. Most of us aren't at a fork in the road deciding whether to use AI or not use AI. We're already on that road. And that could be in the daily use, our day-to-day activities, or in the specific tools that we use within our work, or perhaps within the organization that we either work for or belong with or help. So what's come up in several of the conversations that I've had with practitioners and other organizations is the guilt they feel over using AI tools. And perhaps now we can set that guilt down. It wasn't so much whether or not we actually use AI. That choice for most of us has already been made. The real question is actually quite a bit harder, but a lot more useful. Now that we're in, how do we do it well? Figuring out where AI fits in, how to use it, what good looks like, what we should keep AI away from, where human judgment falls into that process. And that's where we head next, a practical framework for good, intentional use. I'll see you in the last video.